The Rose of Greenwood. Chapter 4. Storm Clouds. That evening, too, Rose opened her diary. May 30th, 1921. Today, the name Dick Rowland changed everything in Greenwood. Rose Washington had noticed the change in atmosphere before she even fully awakened that Tuesday morning. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension, like the moment before lightning strikes when every hair on your body stands on end. From her bedroom window, she could see clusters of people gathered on street corners, their voices carrying an urgency that was entirely different from the usual morning conversations of neighbors. She dressed quickly in her dark blue working dress, the one that made her feel capable and professional, as if proper attire could somehow provide armor against whatever storm was brewing. The fabric felt different against her skin today, not softer or rougher, but somehow more significant, as if she might need to remember exactly what she was wearing when her world shifted on its axis. Downstairs, she found her family already gathered in the kitchen, but the usual warmth of their morning routine had been replaced by something more somber. Dr. Washington sat at the table with his coffee growing cold, reading not the medical journals that usually claimed his attention, but a copy of the Tulsa Tribune that someone had brought to their door before dawn. "Morning, Papa, Mama." Rose kissed her father's cheek as always, but she could feel the tension in his jaw, the way his muscles were coiled like a spring wound too tight. "Morning, my Rose," he said, but his voice carried none of its usual warmth. Instead, it held the careful tone he used when delivering difficult news to patients' families. Clara stood at the stove, stirring a pot of oatmeal with mechanical precision, her movements sharp and efficient. She had pinned her hair back severely and chosen her plainest dress, as if preparing for work rather than a normal day at home. When she turned to greet Rose, her smile was strained. "Sit down, honey. We need to talk." Rose felt her stomach drop. In her 24 years, those 4 words, "we need to talk," had never preceded good news. Tommy was conspicuously absent from his usual place at the breakfast table. "Where's Tommy?" "At the Johnson house," Clara said, setting a bowl of oatmeal before Rose. Dr. Washington thought it would be better if he stayed with friends today. "Better for what?" "Papa, what's happening?" Dr. Washington folded the newspaper carefully, as if the act of creasing the paper could somehow contain the troubling news printed within it. "There was an incident yesterday, Rose. A young colored man named Dick Rowland was accused of assaulting a white woman in an elevator at the Drexel building downtown." Rose felt the blood drain from her face. She had heard enough stories, listened to enough whispered conversations, to know that such accusations, whether true or false, were the stuff of nightmares for colored communities throughout the South. "What kind of assault?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "The reports are unclear. Some say he grabbed her arm. Others say he merely stumbled and touched her accidentally. The woman herself, Sarah Page, an elevator operator, has been quite inconsistent in her account." Dr. Washington's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone trying to present facts without revealing his own fears. "But the nature of the truth may be less important than the nature of the accusation." "They arrested him? Yesterday afternoon. He's being held in the county courthouse." Rose stared at her oatmeal, her appetite completely gone. "And people are upset about it?" Clara let out a bitter laugh. "Upset is putting it mildly, child. The Tribune ran a story this morning with the headline, 'Nab Negro for attacking girl in elevator.' By afternoon, there were crowds gathering downtown, and the talk is getting uglier by the hour." "What kind of talk?" Dr. Washington and Clara exchanged a look that spoke of conversations Rose had not been privy to, decisions made in the early morning hours while she slept. "The kind that suggests some people believe justice won't be served through proper legal channels," Dr. Washington said finally. "The kind that talks about taking matters into their own hands." Rose felt cold despite the warmth of the May morning. "You mean, we don't know what we mean yet," Clara said firmly. "But we're being careful. Your father's been in touch with other community leaders, and everyone agrees we need to be prepared." "Prepared for what?" "For whatever comes," Dr. Washington said. "Rose, I want you to understand something. This situation could resolve itself peacefully. The young man could be released, or tried fairly, or the whole thing could be revealed as a misunderstanding. These things have happened before. But they've also gone very differently before. And when they do, it's communities like ours that suffer. Rose pushed her oatmeal around in the bowl, watching the brown sugar dissolve into meaningless swirls. The library will remain closed today, Dr. Washington said firmly. I spoke with Mrs. Henderson early this morning. She's agreed that discretion is the better part of valor for now. But my evening class, Rose. Her father's voice carried a tone she had rarely heard, one that brooked no argument. There will be no evening class tonight. No library visits, no errands downtown, no unnecessary ventures beyond Greenwood. Not today. The finality in his voice scared her more than anything else he had said. Dr. Washington was not a man given to panic or overreaction. If he was confining his family to their neighborhood, the situation must be more serious than even her worst imaginings. How long? She asked quietly. Until we know more. Until we can assess what we're dealing with. Rose spent the morning pacing the house like a caged animal, unable to concentrate on reading or sewing or any of the domestic activities that usually filled her days. The walls that had always seemed spacious and welcoming now felt confining, and the familiar furniture appeared somehow strange, as if she were seeing her own home through different eyes. Around noon, visitors began arriving. First Dr. Jackson, then Mr. Williams from the tailor shop, then a steady stream of other men from the community. They gathered in Dr. Washington's study, their voices a constant murmur of serious conversation punctuated by occasional bursts of animated discussion. Rose tried to respect their privacy, but as the afternoon wore on, her anxiety made subtlety impossible. She found excuses to walk past the study door, to bring the men coffee, to organize the bookshelf in the hallway where she could overhear fragments of their conversation. Heard they're gathering near the courthouse, talking about rope, for God's sake. Can't just sit here and let them. Have to think about our families, our businesses, what our grandfathers would have done. The pieces of conversation created a mosaic of fear and determination that made Rose's chest tighten with each passing hour. By late afternoon, she couldn't stand the uncertainty any longer. She knocked on the study door and entered without waiting for permission. Papa, I need to know what's happening. Really happening. Not the careful version you think I can handle, but the truth. The room fell silent. 8 men, leaders of the Greenwood community, people she had known and respected her entire life, stared at her with expressions that ranged from protective to apologetic to grimly resigned. Rose, Dr. Washington began. I'm not a child, Papa. I teach adults to read. I understand history. I know what happens when mobs gather outside jails where young colored men are being held. Tell me what you know. Dr. Jackson cleared his throat. Miss Rose, the reports we're getting from downtown are troubling. Large crowds have been gathering near the courthouse all day. The mood is getting more hostile as the hours pass. How hostile? The kind of hostile that suggests they're not content to let the legal system handle this matter, said Mr. Williams. There's talk of direct action. Rose felt her knees go weak. A lynching. The word hung in the air like a physical presence, ugly and terrifying in its simplicity. We don't know that for certain, Dr. Washington said quickly. But given the historical precedent and the rhetoric we're hearing, we have to consider it a possibility. So what are we going to do about it? The question surprised even Rose herself. She hadn't planned to ask it, hadn't consciously decided to insert herself into their deliberations. But the words came out with a force that suggested they had been building inside her all day. We're going to be very careful, Dr. Washington said. We're going to protect our community and our families. But what about Dick Rowland? What about justice? Another silence fell over the room. Rose could see the conflict in their faces, the desire to do what was right warring with the need to protect what they had built. Finally, Reverend Hughes spoke up. He was an elderly man, one who had been born into slavery and had seen more of America's capacity for racial violence than most. Miss Rose, sometimes justice and survival don't align. Sometimes we have to choose which one we can live with. And if we choose survival over justice, how do we live with ourselves? It was Mr. Elliot who answered, his voice heavy with years of difficult compromises. The same way our parents and grandparents did. By remembering that we can't fight every battle, but we can make sure we survive to fight the battles we can win. Rose looked around the room at these men she had grown up respecting, these pillars of her community who had built Greenwood from nothing into something magnificent. She could see the wisdom in their caution, the love behind their protective instincts. But she could also see something else. The accumulated weight of a lifetime of swallowed anger, deferred justice, strategic retreats in the face of overwhelming odds. And what if Dick Rowland doesn't survive to fight any battles at all? The question hung unanswered as the meeting broke up, the men dispersing to their homes and businesses with promises to stay in touch throughout the evening. As the last visitor left, Rose found herself alone with her parents in a house that suddenly felt too quiet. "Rose," Clara said gently, "I know this is hard. I know it feels like we're abandoning our principles. Are we?" "We're being realistic," Dr. Washington said. "We're remembering that principles are meaningless if we're not alive to live by them." "But Papa, if we don't stand up for what's right when it matters most, when do we stand up at all?" Her father looked at her with an expression that was equal parts pride and heartbreak. "When we can stand up and still be standing afterward, my Rose. When we can fight and still have something left to protect." That evening, the Washington family ate dinner in near silence. Clara had prepared Tommy's favorite meal, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from their garden, but none of them had much appetite. The empty chair where Tommy usually sat seemed to loom larger with each passing minute. As darkness fell, Rose found herself drawn repeatedly to the windows, looking out at Greenwood Avenue. The street appeared normal at first glance, the same gas lamps casting their familiar pools of light, the same solid brick buildings standing sentinel in the darkness. But as she watched more carefully, she began to notice the subtle signs of a community on edge. Lights burned in windows that were usually dark by this hour. Groups of men gathered on porches and street corners, their conversations intense and gesticulated. Women hurried along the sidewalks with their children close beside them, moving with the quick efficiency of people trying to get safely home. Around 9 o'clock, a knock came at the front door. Dr. Washington answered it to find young Billy Patterson, the son of one of his patients, breathing hard from running. "Dr. Washington, sir, my daddy sent me to tell you. There's word from downtown. They're saying a white mob tried to storm the courthouse, tried to get to that boy Dick Rowland." Rose felt her heart skip a beat. "What happened?" "Sheriff stopped them, sir. For now. But the talk is they'll try again. And sir," Billy hesitated, glancing nervously at Rose and Clara, "there's other talk too. About coming to Greenwood. About putting us in our place." The boy's words hit Rose like a physical blow. She had been so focused on the fate of Dick Rowland that she hadn't fully considered the possibility that the violence might spread beyond the courthouse, might reach into their own community. Dr. Washington thanked Billy and sent him home with instructions to stick to the back streets and avoid any crowds. After the boy left, the Washington family stood in their front hallway, looking at each other with the knowledge that their world had shifted irrevocably in the space of a single day. "What do we do now?" Rose asked. "Now we wait," Clara said. "We pray. And we prepare." "Prepare how?" Dr. Washington was already moving toward his study. "We make sure we have supplies, food, water, medical equipment. We identify safe places where we can go if necessary. And we stay in communication with our neighbors." As her parents began making their preparations, Rose found herself thinking about her students. Where was Grace Mitchell tonight? Was she safe in her small apartment near the theater? What about elderly Mr. Thompson? Was anyone checking on him? And the children in her informal Sunday school class? Were their parents having conversations like this one, trying to explain the inexplicable, trying to prepare for the unthinkable? She thought about the books in the library, the careful records she had kept of her students' progress, the plans she had made for future lessons. All of it suddenly seemed fragile, precious, and vulnerable in ways she had never imagined. Around 11 o'clock, another visitor arrived. This time it was Dr. Jackson, his face grim in the lamplight. "Samuel," he said to Rose's father, "we need to talk. All of us." There's been a development. The three adults gathered in the parlor while Rose hovered in the doorway, no longer caring about the propriety of eavesdropping. The day's events had stripped away such social niceties. What kind of development? Dr. Washington asked. A group of colored men went downtown to the courthouse. They offered to help the sheriff protect the prisoner. Rose felt a surge of hope. That's good, isn't it? That shows we're responsible citizens, that we want justice to be served properly. Dr. Jackson's expression suggested otherwise. The sheriff turned them away, told them their help wasn't needed. But the white crowd saw it as provocative. Provocative how? They interpreted it as colored folks getting uppity, taking matters into their own hands. Some are saying it proves we think we're above the law. Rose felt anger surge through her. We offered to help uphold the law. The law isn't always about legal principles, Rose, Dr. Jackson said sadly. Sometimes it's about who has the power to define what justice means. Clara stood up abruptly. I'm going to pack some things. Just in case. As her mother left the room, Rose found herself staring out the window at the peaceful street that had been her home for her entire life. The elm tree her father had planted when she was born rustled in the evening breeze. The house across the street, where the elderly Wilson couple had lived for 30 years, glowed warmly with lamplight. Everything looked exactly as it always had. But Rose understood now that appearances could be deceiving, that safety was not a permanent condition but a temporary privilege that could be revoked without warning. Dr. Jackson, she said quietly, what do you really think is going to happen? The older man looked at her for a long moment before answering. I think, Miss Rose, that we're about to discover what we're really made of. All of us. The question is whether we'll like what we find out. After Dr. Jackson left, Rose helped her parents with their preparations. They filled buckets with water, gathered medical supplies, packed a bag of essential clothing and documents. The domestic activities were soothing in their normalcy, creating an illusion that they were simply preparing for a camping trip or a visit to relatives. But Rose could see the fear in her parents' eyes, could feel it in the careful way they chose which possessions were most important, which memories they couldn't bear to lose. As midnight approached, Rose finally retreated to her bedroom to write in her diary. Her hand shook slightly as she opened the leather-bound book that had been her companion through so many ordinary days. May 30, 1921. Today I learned that the world can change in the space of a heartbeat, that safety is an illusion, that the community I love exists at the mercy of forces beyond our control. A young man named Dick Rowland may have stumbled in an elevator, or he may not have. The truth may never matter as much as the story people choose to believe. I keep thinking about my students, scattered throughout Greenwood tonight, probably as frightened as I am. I think about the books in the library, the lessons we were planning, the dreams we were building word by careful word. Will any of it survive whatever is coming? Will we? Papa says we must choose between justice and survival, as if they are incompatible. But I wonder if that choice itself is the real tragedy, that we have been forced to live in a world where doing what's right might mean losing everything we've worked for. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I pray it brings peace, reason, a return to the rule of law rather than the rule of the mob. But if it brings something else, we will face it together. We will not let fear destroy what love has built. The dreams will continue, even if everything else changes. Somehow, someway, the dreams will continue. Rose closed her diary and prepared for bed, knowing that sleep would be difficult if not impossible. Outside her window, Greenwood settled into an uneasy night, a community holding its breath and hoping for the best while preparing for the worst. In the distance, she could hear the sound of automobiles moving along the main roads, their engines carrying an urgency that had not been there the night before. Voices called out in the darkness, not the usual evening conversations of neighbors, but something more charged with purpose and apprehension. As she lay in her bed, listening to the sounds of a community on edge, Rose found herself thinking about Dick Rowland, alone in his cell at the courthouse. Did he understand what his alleged misstep had set in motion? Could he imagine that his name would become a catalyst for events far beyond his control? She thought about Sarah Page, the elevator operator whose account of events would shape so many lives. What was she feeling tonight? Fear? Regret? Did she understand the power her words carried in a world where the testimony of a white woman against a colored man could ignite fires that would burn far beyond the courthouse steps? And she thought about the men who had gathered outside that courthouse, driven by emotions she couldn't fully comprehend, anger, perhaps, or a desire for a justice that looked very different from the kind she believed in. What were they feeling as they went home to their own families tonight? What stories would they tell their children about why certain people deserved protection and others did not? These thoughts swirled through Rose's mind as she drifted toward untroubled sleep, a young woman on the edge of discovering that the world she had trusted was far more fragile than she had ever imagined. In her dreams, she was teaching her evening class, but the words in their books kept changing, shifting from stories of hope and progress to warnings of dangers she couldn't quite understand. She woke several times during the night, listening for sounds that might signal immediate danger, but hearing only the normal night sounds of a neighborhood trying to maintain its equilibrium in the face of approaching storm. When dawn finally came, Rose would discover that some nights change everything, and that the distance between safety and catastrophe can be measured in hours rather than years. But for now, she slept fitfully, holding onto the hope that tomorrow might somehow restore the peace that yesterday had so carelessly destroyed.